When I truck around the country, as I do a great deal, and I talk to ordinary folk about pharmacogenomics, they are incredibly intrigued by it. And the first thing they say is, why aren't you doing this already? It seems like a kind of slam dunk thing for most ordinary people. Now, the second question, I'll come to the second question there, but I think, and I really believe this, that pharmacogenomics is genomics Trojan horse. The public get pharmacogenomics in a way that they don't necessarily get genomics. Now, that may sound contradictory to you, but actually, genomics, and when we talk about whole genome sequencing in particular, people get very anxious because they think, and it's all my fault, but broadcasters and writers have spent their whole working lives telling people that their genome is a blueprint. They've spent their lives watching CSI and things like that. They think that you can tell when you're going to die from a bit of spit taken off a windscreen and looked at under a purple light in a glossy laboratory with a lot of women with flicking hair. Several of whom are here today. So that's kind of what people think. And genomics to them, it's much more scary. If you say to them, look, we can test you to see how you'll react to a load of common drugs, they just say, bring it on. Why aren't you doing it already? And actually, once people get comfortable with the idea of something involving DNA being a kind of regular test, being like, having your blood type tested, people get that, and it's not scary and it's not difficult. There are some things that people then say. One of them is this one. People say this a lot to me. You mean that drugs don't work? And what I would imagine that once you start doing something like this, you get a lot of headlines, mainly in the Daily Mail, saying 50% of drugs don't work. And people assume then that the wicked pharmaceutical companies have known that all along, and that there's some kind of conspiracy. So there are kind of some things to avoid there. So what I'm really telling you is that the messaging around pharmacogenomics is, despite the fact that Keith has known about this since he was a child, is that we have to present this as being a relatively new development, because otherwise people immediately assume that actually all of us have known about drugs not working for everybody for a very long time. And somehow there's a conspiracy. But I think there are considerable issues about how to present information to people. And I'd like to come to you with some ideas about what tests mean to people. So if you have a result from a pharmacogenomic test, you need to have something that you, the patient, can understand. Because we shouldn't, when we advance into pharmacogenomics, be patriarchal about it. That somehow this information is to be kept in your medical record and it's not for you to know. People can be trusted with their own medical information. And it's quite astonishing, I think, that the only time that people are generally trusted with their complete health records is when they're pregnant. When they have, and all the women are immediately looking and saying, I remember that bit, the bit where you have so much progesterone washing through your system that actually you can't even remember it's Tuesday, and yet you're trusted with your records. So, people can be trusted with them. So the name of your drug, some kind of traffic light system. A red one, you should never be given this drug. Amber, you should take care. There are issues about dose. And then green, this drug works for you, there are no dose. There has to be something really simple where patients also have the information. Because someone asked about how it was going to, you sir from America, you were asked how it would transfer between systems. And actually we know that it's patients who frequently hold the ring between different parts of the health system. That's why patients have to have this information and have to have it in a really simple form. So, who's in charge of my result? And I ask you this because is it a healthcare professional? Is it me? Is it my pharmacist? This really matters because if it's a healthcare professional, does it go in my medical record? How can I be sure that they've checked it before I'm given my medicine? And the answer is, actually, I can't be sure. I really can't be sure. And at the moment, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, there isn't a place in the medical electronic record. So if I pitch up with a 23andMe test and I've got a vast reaction to Stevens-Johnson's, it can't go in. So how are people... It can go in, okay. But in some areas, but not others. So how can I be...
They don't do Stevens-Johnson syndrome anyway.
All right. Okay, but how can I be sure that it's been checked? And here's another thing. If a health professional is holding this information, should people get into trouble if they don't check and I get the wrong dose? And if it's me or my pharmacist that are holding this data, am I the one who should be telling people that I've got a likely reaction to a particular medicine? And does the pharmacist get it? For instance, if I'm wildly, you shouldn't take a particular medicine, is it going to go on all my prescriptions? How are people going to know about this? These things are important. These are the kind of consumer end of the fancy stuff that you're all thinking about. But there are some potential issues. I said that I think that the public is enormously enthusiastic about pharmacogenomics. There are some groups of people who are not so enthusiastic. And there isn't a huge amount in the literature about this, but certainly US data suggests that particular ethnic groups are suspicious about this and think that it may be a way of using information for racially profiling, and if it's racially profiling, that they may get less good medicine, or they may be discriminated against in some other way. So there is an issue there. Here's an issue that I think applies much more to the pharmacogenomics around something like cancer or some of the more expensive miracle medicines. And I would put this as like this, you know a lot, but you don't know everything, folks. So if somebody comes along and says, actually, Mrs. Jones, you're not going to do well on this particular drug because I've done this test here, and it says that you would not do well on this, you're going to do well on something better. And Mrs. Jones has seen a lot of people do very well on this drug. She may argue, but you don't know everything, do you? It may work for me, it may work less well for me, but I still want to try it. So I think you may see some challenge in that area. And I think there's another area that you have to be careful about, and that's an area of despair when you are not suitable for most of the medicines. So therefore you think that you have been abandoned and you've been somehow cast aside and you're going to do really badly because whatever fancy stuff is going to work for other people is not going to work for you. And how do you cope with that? What's the psychological impact of that? Now, you may say, actually, you'll have standard of care and standard of care. You know, we'll look after you as well as we possibly can. Actually, the patient may still not believe you. The patient may still think, actually, do you know what? I'm really unlucky. I'm lucky enough to get this horrible thing that I've got, and now I'm doubly unlucky because I'm not going to get the right medicines because I'm not the right candidate for them. And that will be a very hard pill for people not to swallow. I wanted to finish by saying something about how you introduce pharmacogenomics. I think that you need a stunt, ladies and gentlemen. I think, and I've been talking to Channel 4 a bit about this lately, I think you need something where you introduce a panel or whatever it is and you offer it to a very large number of people as part of a television program. Because then what happens is you can have people discussing the results, but then what happens is you get patient pull. I don't think you've had or used patient pull nearly enough in the NHS. I think very frequently, the classic thing that I look at always is keyhole surgery. Now, some of you can argue, and with good reason, that keyhole surgery came in far too quickly. But actually, keyhole surgery came in because patients demanded it because they really got it. And I think pharmacogenomics is exactly the same thing. I think that if you do something really big with one of the big broadcasters, then I think that you drive patient demand. Because I go back to my very first slide, why aren't you doing it already?